Hi, welcome to season 11. We're on episode 6, which we're looking at platforms and ecosystems. And we love it because we're investigating it and really trying to see how it applies as well. And so one of our big questions for this podcast is, how do you scale? If you are creating that platform, how do you manage it and be able to really build it out? And of course, I'm Mary Abzia, Tom Spitali, Sean Wellham with Impact Planning Group. So I'm going to hand this over to Tom and help us expand on our question, Tom.
Yeah, well, the more we've all collectively looked at this, the more we realize that, scaling a platform is really a strategic marketing problem. There's the supply side. You need to attract and retain suppliers, and you also need to, on the demand side, attract and retain consumers or buyers. And so that requires a value proposition, and it requires some of the other strategic marketing principles: segmenting, targeting, positioning. But it seems to me that probably the biggest difference on a platform is that, you've got the sort of chicken and egg problem that we talked about last time. Because you're in the middle between suppliers and consumers or buyers, you have to figure out how to really get them both going at the same time. It's sort of a sequencing problem, because suppliers, I think, Sean, you mentioned this on the last call, suppliers don't want to be there if there's not enough buyers. And of course, buyers don't want to be there if there's not enough suppliers. And so, it is a bit tricky to do that and to get that going. And so I guess as I start to look at it, it seems like, there are like principles of segmentation. Do you guys, do you see that it's like important, and maybe the biggest difference between traditional marketing is really trying to find suppliers and get suppliers? And how do you do that? How do you kind of get an initial cadre of suppliers going?
Yeah, I think there's it is one of those conundrums. I mean, maybe the bluntest instrument is what Xbox did when they launched their console. They wanted to attract game developers. So Xbox is a platform in terms of gamers and the content they game with. If game is a verb in that context, I'm not sure. I'm not really in that world. But what they had to do was invest and let the developers know, we're investing $500 million in launching this platform. We are going to go to the consumer shows, we're going to put it into retailers, and this is the proposition. So if you invest, this was one of the issues that came up. I mentioned the credit card I was involved with, where we had this exact problem. No, it was specifically for fuel. And if you didn't have drivers carrying it, gas stations wouldn't want it. And if you didn't have gas stations accepting it, drivers wouldn't want it. That was the conundrum. And one of the solutions, we never went down this road because it was too high risk, was to invest heavily in the consumer value proposition. So say to the gas stations, in my specific example, you take it and they will come because we're investing this much money and here's our program of advertising. So one way to break that conundrum is to invest heavily on the demand side and convince the suppliers that demand will be there, and you're putting your money where your mouth is. That's one fairly blunt and expensive instrument, but that is what some big brands have done. They recognize they can't start both together, so they convince one that they'll invest heavily in the other.
Yeah, Sean, I want to go into segmentation a little bit more with what Tom was saying. Is, when we talk about segmentation, we typically think of it for the customers or clients. But what I like about what Tom's saying is it's rare that we look and say, okay, we have to segment our suppliers. And with that, one of the, we segment them, what are all of them? And then our criteria of attractiveness would be suppliers that actually have an appetite for some risk, because, that might be one of our criteria. We're not going to go after everyone, but we're going to find some people that are more like-minded with what we're trying to achieve with our type of brand that we're developing. So I like that idea of you have to almost do double work. You can't just segment customers, you got to segment the suppliers too and use your criteria of attractiveness in both cases.
Kind of what Google did, isn't it? Because when Google owned desktop search, and then obviously mobile became a big thing with the iPhone, and I guess Google were worried that iPhone were going to lock out this exclusive real estate in mobile. And they created the Open Handset Alliance, which was for people that weren't Apple, the Nokias, the Samsungs, other telecom companies. They basically looked at the market. I guess it was segmentation. It's like, who has got a vested interest in stopping Apple becoming so dominant? And that's where the Android platform came from. So that's another strategic initiative, I guess, is some form of a cooperation network of people with a shared interest, which is at the heart of segmentation, the shared need. So Google said, look, we've got all these people that Apple is stealing a march on the market here, but we have an aspiration to protect our desktop footprint and to bring others. And that starts to create a network. And now we have pretty much only two competing mobile operating systems with Android and iOS.
So I have to point out that only Sean would know what Open Handset Alliance was. I'm just like, where did that come from, Sean? Out of all of that trivia that you know, you would definitely win today's trivia with that. The OHA, huh?
Yeah, what can I tell you? It's the stuff I read. It's my job. I can't tell you much about pop culture, but you asked me about strategic initiatives. Maybe I've got something to say.
It's very funny. Thank you.
What I think is interesting about supplier segmentation is you kind of think through the way that we often segment B2B companies. Is we say, one simple way to do it is that some B2Bs are their whole companies about operational excellence, driving down costs and achieving volume. Some are about customer intimacy, providing services and having deep relationships with customers. And then the innovators who are all about being, the first to market with new stuff. And it seems to me that the operational excellence type of company is probably this kind of supplier that's most attracted to a platform. Should that platform grow to a certain number of certain number of buyers that they can get their volume. But I just wonder if there's an angle for platform providers to think through the other segments, especially that customer intimacy segment, right? In terms of their value proposition, because at face value, what you think on a platform as a customer intimate type of seller is I'm going to lose some of that, right? I have a sales force, I have my traditional channels, I have direct access to the customer, I can see buying cues, I can get information, I can form and build and deepen that relationship. And on a platform, maybe that's owned by the platform, that kind of data, the customer data. So maybe one of the platform that wants to attract that kind of seller could be thinking through what kinds of information that they could pass through or make available to sellers so that they can begin to build that relationship. Maybe even make the platform the place where that kind of relationship can grow, so that the supplier isn't tempted to take the relationship outside of the platform after the initial sale. So it seems to me that, the sequencing problem is you need some minimum number of suppliers before you have a platform. But then you quickly got to get a lot of buyers so that more suppliers are drawn in. So it seems like an early stage task for any platform provider is thinking through how can I create that value proposition to get that initial cadre of suppliers so that there's at least enough buyers who are interested in it, and I can start that symbiotic relationship that grows things on both ends.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I was almost thinking the innovators would go of the three segments. It in the early stages. There's probably not going to be much efficiencies because you're getting all of the flywheel started. So I'm wondering if they would have a more open mindset And then the operational excellence, they come in when you've got your system set up, and the customer intimate ones are going to wait until you can prove that customers are happy in that platform. So I was thinking if the sequencing was different, but you're right, you've got to build sizzle along the way. Even in the pilot, there has to be some sizzle that makes people go, oh, I want to be part of this. And then you bake the cake a little bit more and you put some more, it is interesting how you have to be more nimble and more creative perhaps than just a straightforward business.
Yeah, I guess this is like a single user utility, isn't it? It doesn't rely on having both sides of the equation. So if you can create sufficient value for a group, be it the producers or the consumers, and have it as standalone value, then the critical mass that build then leads to the other part of the jigsaw, the other piece. So Instagram did that, didn't they? They originally were a great tool for taking photos in your camera and editing them and putting some goofy things on, but they built up user utility, the people with phones who wanted to take and adjust their photos. That was the bedrock, and then it became a social network. And today it's a massive social network, as we know, but it didn't start off. It started off rather by creating a one-sided utility just for the people with phones who take photographs and want to edit them. That was the whole focus. And then that grew into a platform because you had this engaged. So I guess that's another way, is to look at one side and think of that single user utility idea. How can we make it so as they want to stick around regardless of having the equation balanced from day one?
Yeah. Sean, I was interested, do you know that your Xbox example, kind of going back to that one, were there any financial incentives for the developers? So let's say that you're like, a platform needs developers, it needs innovators, it needs people to create apps, or makes people to create or bring products. Was Xbox financially incentivizing the developers before the demand side was there, or was it just the promise of the demand?
I don't know. I'm guessing it would be somewhere between a promise of the demand as evidenced by the investment, maybe some minimum order values. If you produce this title, then we'll cover you for the development. I don't know. I'm saying that's what I'm speculating. I know they did wave the big investment banner as saying, develop for this platform because it's going to be big. So beyond that, I don't know the specifics, but it's another strategy, isn't it? In broad terms, is if you can get high value users onto the platform, they'll attract others. So if you could get big developers, big game developers making their games available for Xbox, then other maybe more boutique or specialist outfits would also think, well, if they're doing it, then we better do. Sometimes and there's another segmentation, if the high value suppliers will attract other suppliers just by fact that they're there. The only example I've got is quite a crude one, but when I used to go out and nightclubs and that kind of thing, sometime in the early 17th century, I think it was, feels like it. But a lot of nightclubs had a policy that women didn't pay to get in the clubs. Men did pay to get in the clubs. And it's obvious why, because men would want to go to the clubs that had women in general terms, depending on your sexual preference. I make no judgment. I'm making this a personal anecdote. That was what the reality was. So we, if you like, the high value customers were attracted and they brought others in. And it's a similar sort of thing. I know that's a very silly example, but if you can find where suppliers that will attract other suppliers, then that's where you should focus. And maybe a financial incentive makes sense at that point.
It could. Go ahead, Mary.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was thinking about, in B2B, who's doing it, because I like your example is unfortunately very, very clear and true. And it's a great pricing example too, who gets to come in free. So I like that. I was trying to think if, John Deere seems to be a company in B2B that has done something like it. If you work with anyone in agriculture, John Deere has a very strong brand and they've attracted, but then they've worked with like this cadre of other types of suppliers that have built that platform finance and probably even some kind of law, if because agriculture is always under the scrutiny of some type of regulation. So I was thinking, is there any other B2B companies that you think have done this or are on the forefront of it?
Well, anybody that's, it gets very close to the line of whether it's a platform or not, where, companies have, pulled together the broader ecosystem of products. So maybe John Deere being in the middle, but then beginning to, look around and saying, what are some of the other needs that our customers have, and filling it in with trusted partners that can make the transition or the handoff really, really smooth. Is that a platform? Maybe in some ways.
It's kind of like if you have this, and maybe this is more relevant for people listening to this who want to create a platform, you've got to start as a producer maybe. So if you already have a strong offer, but there's gaps in it, look at Amazon. They were exclusively booksellers, then they broadened their range. And of course now Amazon Marketplace, where independent retailers can come under get into the big Amazon tent for their own, put their stall out, is a whole new business. So Amazon Marketplace is a definite platform, but it started because Amazon were originally a producer and said, we've got this great base, what can we do with it? Apple did the same with the apps, the App Store. You can write an app to go on the App Store, whereas historically that was a closed system. Apple didn't want anyone else's software or anyone else's programming. They have strict protocols, but they've opened out a whole new marketplace where you can put an app onto the App Store and you pay Apple rent essentially for the space. So again, they start as a producer and then scale up by saying there's other people that could play here, and it could be very collaborative rather than overly competitive. It could enhance the offer. So maybe that's another strategic tool, is start off as the producer and then broaden out the supplier base.
Which is what you wonder if that's what John Deere would you say that strategy would be consistent with, say, John Deere then kind of looking at their tractor line and seeing, they got this entire ecosystem, and now they're saying, well, there's some holes in our tractor line, and maybe we bring in some other suppliers that have those now is it more of a platform? Because now somebody can come on, it's not just John Deere and friends. It's a place where I can go to find exactly what I need, regardless of whether it's a John Deere tractor, and all the accoutrements that go with it, finance and legal advice and all of those things. It becomes more of, I think, of a platform. It seems to me too that patience is huge here. Let me say what I mean. I think that you've got to have this initial cadre of suppliers, right, before you can attract any kind of demand side stuff. And so you've got to figure out, how do I incent that initial cadre of suppliers to be patient, while I build it up. But another thing that I think I see is another aspect of patience that I see is the patience to be really focused and then spread out. Amazon for many years, as you said, Sean, they started out as the world's biggest bookstore, right? And they slowly grew. I remember the waiting for Amazon stock price to appreciate in the early days, and it never happened for a long time because Bezos kept taking all the profits and plowing it in to creating more and more, reach, more and more product lines, et cetera, et cetera. So this went on for years and years and years, and look at the result now. I think their stock sells for close to $2,000 a share. I remember when it was $2, $3 a share.
Should have bought more.
Yeah.
So we're going to close on this note, and we really hope that you have started thinking maybe about your business a bit different and applying some of the basic principles that you might apply normally, but in a new way if you're setting up and starting to grow a platform. And I do like what Tom said about patience is with everything, make sure that you give yourself twice as long to do it, because it isn't easy by any means. So thank you. You can find all our podcasts on pretty much where you get your podcasts, including our accidentalmarketer.com website and iTunes. So thank you. And we keep telling us feedback. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.